Despite it being humanity's constant companion through all of recorded time, the moon is still a mystery. Science has been unable to explain how the moon was formed, its unusual orbit, its distance from us, its density, composition, or structure. These are all still questions. Now, there are theories about the moon that may answer some of these questions, but they don't answer all of them. There's only one theory that answers every scientific question about the moon. Just one. The moon is a hollow, artificial structure brought here by someone else. The moon is an alien spaceship. Let's start at the beginning. We're taught that the moon has been here forever, but there's controversy about this because scientists don't agree on how the moon was formed. The first theory of how the moon became linked to the Earth is the capture theory. It says the moon was just floating along, drifted near the Earth, and was pulled into orbit. This is almost impossible. The gravitational forces needed to capture an object as big as the moon would have to be immense and precise. Another explanation is the accretion theory, which states that the moon and Earth formed out of dust clouds in the early solar system. But when systems form through accretion, they share similar traits. If the moon were formed this way, it would have an iron core, like the Earth. It would spin on an axis, like the Earth. But neither of these is true. The fission hypothesis was popular for a while. It states that the early Earth was spinning so fast that the moon was formed out of rock in the Pacific Ocean that was flung into space. But we later learned that moon rock is much older than the bottom of the ocean, so this is unlikely. The most popular explanation is the giant impact theory. This says that a large object about the size of Mars, sometimes called Theia, smashed into the proto-Earth. The debris field from the collision coalesced to create the Earth-Moon system. Again, these conditions would have to be so perfect that the odds are astronomical. Pardon the pun. A recent theory combines all of these, that a large object collided with the Earth about 4.5 billion years ago, essentially vaporizing it. And this vapor is called a synestia, and the synestia was spinning very rapidly, forming a torus. A torus is a fancy way of saying donut-shaped. And the moon formed on the edge of this rapidly spinning donut of debris. Again, it's just another theory. We still don't know for certain how the moon was created. You would think that actually going to the moon and collecting rock samples would solve some of these puzzles. But when moon rocks were brought back and studied, it only created more questions. On Earth, the newest rocks are at the surface, and the rock gets older as you go deeper. This is obvious and logical. But on the moon, the soil on the surface is older than the rocks underneath, and the surface rocks are older than the rocks underneath them. It's backward. The only way this happens on Earth is when we drill, dig, and mine, bringing older material to the surface. But we see the strange soil phenomenon all over the moon. If the moon were somehow hollowed out, older rock would be on top. But the list of anomalies goes on. Typical planetary structures have denser materials toward the core and lighter materials toward the surface. On the moon, this too is reversed. No one can really explain why the moon's surface is pockmarked by asteroid impacts that have occurred over billions of years. You would expect the rock around the impact craters to be different ages, but there's a strange uniformity in the age of the rocks, almost like the surface of the moon was engineered to look like it has billions of years of impacts. The chemical makeup of lunar dust is also very odd. If lunar dust is the result of billions of years of impacts, why does it have different chemical makeup than the rocks around it? The moon does not have a magnetic field, yet moon rocks are strongly magnetized. Apollo 15 found strong local magnetic fields around the moon, which seem to be caused by magnetized material below the surface. In fact, missions 15 through 17 had quite a few equipment failures, which were blamed on the effects of the vacuum of space, but all the issues were the same. Electrical motors were failing, motors that used magnets. A strong magnetic field could cause some motors to fail by causing saturation, demagnetization, or something called torque ripple. Torque ripple is a term for fluctuations in the torque output of electric motors. In simpler terms, it's like an engine revving unevenly, causing vibrations or inconsistent power. If the motor operates under varying loads or in the presence of strong magnetic fields, as observed during the Apollo missions in the vicinity of the moon, this can result in noise, reduced performance, and even mechanical wear. Although the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, the oldest rocks we found are much younger than that. Moon rocks are older, much older. Some rocks have been dated to the very beginning of the solar system, and some are said to be even older than that. The only way rocks can be older than the solar system is if they came from a different solar system. Uranium-236 and Neptunium-237 are found on the moon. Now, this is notable because those radioactive elements don't occur naturally. The only way we see those isotopes on Earth is if we create them. Titanium, chromium, and zirconium are rare on Earth, but they are everywhere on the moon. If the Earth and Moon were formed together, why such a big difference? Now, those metals I mentioned happen to be some of the strongest materials known to exist, and they're highly resistant to corrosion. If you wanted to reinforce a structure for long-distance travel or for long-term endurance, these are precisely the metals you would use. This structural reinforcement could explain why moon craters all seem to be the same depth, no matter how wide they are. Shouldn't craters of different sizes be of different depths? It's as if there's a resilient metallic shell just beneath the surface of the moon, preventing anything from penetrating further. If there were instruments on the moon's surface that could detect seismic activity, we could test the hollow moon theory by intentionally colliding objects with it. So the Apollo astronauts did exactly that. After returning to the command module, the Apollo 12 crew intentionally released the lunar lander, crashing it into the moon's surface. Then something very unexpected happened. Seismic measurements showed that the moon rang like a bell and reverberated for more than an hour. This was with a very small object compared to the size of the moon. So, during Apollo 14, an even heavier object was intentionally crashed into the surface of the moon. This time, the moon rang for over 3 hours, and vibrations traveled to a depth of 20 miles. This doesn't happen on Earth. Reverberations last only a few minutes because of the Earth's density. And on Earth, vibrations slow down as they move toward the Earth's center, where material is denser. However, the vibrations on the moon actually got faster around 40 miles down, indicating that the interior of the moon is not only far less dense, but perhaps has large hollow cavities. The density of the moon is something that's difficult to explain. The moon is about 25% the size of the Earth, but it's only about 1% of the Earth's density. If the moon were a hollow shell, this would explain that. Besides the density issue, the moon has many characteristics and coincidences that we don't see anywhere else. The moon is actually more like a planet than a moon. At 1/4 of the Earth's size, no other object in the solar system has a moon this large. This occurs nowhere else, not in our solar system or in any other solar system that we've ever found. And the moon orbits much closely than it should. And its orbit is also a mystery. It's the only object we've ever observed with a nearly perfectly circular orbit. We don't see this anywhere else either. Not anywhere. Because of this near-perfect orbit and its size and distance from the Earth, the moon appears in the sky as almost the exact same size as the sun. This is what allows us to have eclipses. Our distance to the sun is 400 times our distance to the moon, and the sun is 400 times the size of the moon. That's what creates a perfect solar eclipse. Of the more than 285 moons in our solar system, ours is the only one that can have a perfect eclipse. Is this a coincidence? The moon's rotation on its axis takes 27.3 days, and its orbit around Earth takes 27.3 days. Is this another coincidence? Well, when enough coincidences pile up, we may have to adjust our thinking and be a little more open-minded. And that's what happened in 1972. 2 Soviet scientists examined all the evidence and these coincidences and reached what they felt was the only logical conclusion. They agreed that their theory sounded crazy, but they said that not only is the moon hollow, but it's also a spacecraft that traveled here in the distant past. So now we have to ask, who built the moon? Let's talk about interstellar travel. If humans could launch a mission to explore another galaxy, we would need to build a ship. For efficiency's sake, we'd probably design a big ship to hold everything we need and smaller ships to go inside it. We'd call the big one the mothership. A massive amount of engineering and effort would go into its design. Shielding, propulsion, and gravity would be the highest priorities, but that's just the beginning. A mothership would have to be built in orbit and stay in the vacuum of space. Now, with no air friction, its shape wouldn't need to be aerodynamic, but the shape of this giant ship would still be pretty important. I'll give you one guess as to what's the ideal shape for a ship built for long-term, long-distance space travel. Right, the ideal shape is a sphere. A sphere can distribute internal pressure evenly. This would make it strong against external forces like tiny meteor impacts or gravitational fluctuations. To survive in space, we would need to bring everything with us: food, water, air. So internal space would need to be optimized. A sphere has the best ratio of volume to surface area. Artificial gravity would also be a necessity, and again, a sphere would be perfect. Using centrifugal gravity, a sphere could be built in slices, with each slice spinning at a slightly different speed. But those different speeds could be synchronized so that no matter where you were on the ship, you'd feel the same gravity that you feel on Earth, 1g. Or you could spin the whole ship like a planet. The middle of the ship, or the equator, would be 1g, then gravity gets lower as you move further away from the center. This is actually a great idea. People could live in the center of the ship where gravity feels natural, but go a little further north or south, gravity is a little less. This means crops can grow higher. Go even farther north or south toward the poles, and gravity is even less. Ideal for storing heavy equipment. A machine that weighs 1,000 pounds at 1g would only weigh 100 pounds at 0.1g. You get the idea. Also, a sphere would minimize heat loss or gain through the station's surface, maintaining a stable internal temperature. We'd also want to be sure there were no sharp edges or structures that could interfere with docking procedures. Once again, the sphere wins. If an advanced race of aliens built a large ship capable of traveling to a different star, they'd build a sphere, and they'd build something that looks like our moon. So another question, if aliens built the moon, where are they? Every ancient culture on Earth has stories about the moon, but it's interesting that the further back you go, the fewer stories there are. And if you go back far enough, there are stories that talk about a sky before the moon arrived, stories of a dark, empty sky. Roman and Greek authors in the 5th century BC have stories about the Proselynes. They lived in an area called Arcadia and said that they had been there since before there was a moon in the heavens. On the other side of the world, the ancient culture of Tiwanaku in Bolivia also refers to a time when there was no moon. The Tiwanaku claim the moon arrived between 11,500 and 13,000 years ago. Now, if you're into ancient theories as much as I am, you'll recognize that this time coincides perfectly with a period called the Younger Dryas. The Younger Dryas was a sudden drop of the Earth's temperature around 12,900 years ago. It brought a new ice age that lasted for about 1,200 years. The Younger Dryas is strange because the icy period interrupted a gradual warming trend at the end of the last ice age. Then suddenly the Earth's temperature warmed again. The ice caps melted, and 1,000-foot-high tsunamis roared across the Earth, destroying everything in their paths, including people, villages, perhaps even entire civilizations. And if you weren't wiped out by the tsunami and you were living near the coast, the rapidly rising seas would have put you hundreds of feet underwater. All kinds of myths and mysteries refer to the flood at the end of the Younger Dryas. We talk about them a lot on the Y-Files. Now, going back to Africa, there are Zulu legends that specifically say the moon is hollow and living inside is an intelligent race of reptilian extraterrestrials. Yes, lizard people. The Zulu believed the moon was put into orbit by two brothers who were gods. This legend is similar to what the Sumerians believed. The Sumerians also had a legend of two brothers, Enki and Enlil, who were called Anunnaki. These extraterrestrial gods created mankind. The Zulu also believed that before the moon arrived, the climate of the Earth was very different. There were no seasons, and a blanket of thick water vapor covered the entire planet, kind of like how a thick layer of carbon dioxide covers the entire planet of Venus. And we know now that the moon does stabilize our climate. And by the way, Venus has no moons. Without the moon's gravity, the Earth's axis would wobble. There would be no consistent seasons, no tides, and there would be extreme weather. Again, this is just like Venus's atmosphere. Without a moon stabilizing it, Venus's atmosphere is in a constant state of chaos. Winds roar at over 200 miles per hour constantly. Without our moon, the Earth's temperature would swing wildly over thousands and millions of years. Did you know that large earthquakes cause the rate of the Earth's spin to increase? This has been measured over and over again. The Great Sumatra earthquake occurred on December 26, 2004. It was one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded, with a magnitude of 9.1 to 9.3. This earthquake increased the Earth's rotation speed and shortened the length of a day by about 0.5 microseconds. Now, that's not very much, but after billions of years of earthquakes, the Earth would be spinning much faster. But it doesn't. The moon slows us down and keeps our spin stable. Without the moon to slow us down, a day on Earth by now would be only about 10 hours long. The faster spin would also mean 120-mile-an-hour winds would be constantly ripping across the surface, kind of like Venus. The presence of the moon is what allows life on Earth to thrive. So, back to the Zulu. The Earth was covered by a thick layer of water vapor, and you could only see the sun through this hazy mist. When the moon was finally placed into orbit, all this water vapor fell at once, and it created a cataclysmic global flood. Always a flood, every time. Every ancient culture has a flood myth, and there's mounting evidence that this did indeed happen during the Younger Dryas. Cultures around the world have myths that are in perfect sync with each other. The coincidences keep piling up. The Zulu legend talks about how the arrival of the moon changed the tides and stabilized the climate. And this is something that wasn't understood by science until the past 100 years. Yet somehow the ancient Zulu were able to make the connection between the moon and the tides and the seasons. All of these myths and legends, plus strange coincidences and anomalies about the moon, start to add up to a compelling theory that the moon is hollow, is artificial, and was placed here by intelligent beings long ago. But coincidences aren't proof, and myths aren't proof. We need to know what's been happening on the moon lately to see if we can make our case with hard evidence. And lucky for us, the evidence is there. Science tells us that the moon is a cold, lifeless place. It has no atmosphere. There hasn't been seismic activity for millions of years, and its core, unlike the Earth's, is cold. For a supposedly dead world, there's an awful lot of activity up there. On March 7, 1971, a cloud of water vapor appeared on the moon that covered 100 square miles, and it was there for 14 hours before it dissipated. There's not supposed to be an atmosphere on the moon, but for those 14 hours, there was. In fact, 6 astronomers in the past 100 years have documented a glowing mist in the crater named Plato. The same mist, the same crater, over many, many years. Boulder tracks are seen on the moon all over the place, and that's weird enough. Scientists say these are boulders that just happen to roll off steep hills and mountains. But there are boulders on the moon that have rolled for miles, uphill. Since the days of Aristotle, astronomers have seen strange lights appear on the surface of the moon, sometimes visible to the naked eye. NASA even reported that between the years 1540 and 1967, there were 570 sightings of light flashes on the moon that couldn't be explained. Sightings of strange lights continue to this day. The Aristarchus crater was photographed in 1992, and it shows a glowing blue light, now called the Blue Gem. This anomaly has been seen by Earth-based telescopes every few years ever since. Some have speculated it's a fusion reactor beneath the moon's surface. Now, it's not widely known, but the Aristarchus crater was the original moon landing site. But at the last minute, the landing site was changed. Nobody has ever explained why, but I suspect it has something to do with that blue light. And these events of mysterious light and mist happen so frequently, there's even a name for them: transient lunar phenomena, or TLPs. Apollo 18's mission was to investigate these phenomena and determine exactly what was causing them. But Apollo 18 was canceled due to budget cuts. Apollo 17 was the last manned mission to the moon. We haven't been there ever since. But things get even more weird. There are plenty of photographs of what appear to be artificial objects on the surface of the moon. Towers several miles high, pyramids, and symmetrical structures. These have been photographed by astronomers, probes, and even by the astronauts themselves. And the biggest anomaly of all, why haven't we gone back to the moon? Sergeant Carl Wolf was an Air Force technician who repaired the equipment that transferred images from a lunar satellite. He was called to a lab to repair one of these devices. Sergeant Wolf saw photos that showed artificial structures on the moon, including what he described as a base. He saw large domed buildings and lots of smaller buildings clustered together like cities, all connected by some kind of transit system like a monorail. And this is corroborated by another technician working with Wolf. And Wolf wasn't a UFO, ET, moon theory guy. He was just a tech. He was a repairman. He said he was excited to see the pictures on the news and have NASA explain what they were. But he was surprised when the photos never turned up. But a few photos were found in a very early release from NASA. These structures are very large and very tall, and they cast very long shadows. I show them in the Hollow Moon video on the channel. These are photos I'd like to learn more about, but I can't. They no longer exist. Almost immediately after landing on the moon, the Apollo 11 crew said they saw something that shook them up.
It's a beginning of a new age.
If you watch that press conference closely, the astronauts at times look sad, frightened, uncomfortable, and even depressed. Why? Do they know the reason why we haven't returned to the moon? Could it be that the Apollo missions discovered something that ancient cultures knew centuries ago? Something that reputable scientists believe is the only answer to this list of mysteries? That the moon is not what it seems, or not what we've been told. That the moon is hollow, artificially constructed, and appeared in Earth's orbit from somewhere else far away. It all makes sense to me. Does it make sense to you? Apollo 18, 19, and 20 were already planned missions, each with many different tests. But these missions never happened. The reason for canceling? Money. We didn't have the budget. Except we did. The Saturn V rockets, command modules, and lunar modules for these missions were under contract and almost complete. Apollo 11 cost around $355 million, the most expensive Apollo mission. For argument's sake, let's say $355 million for each of the canceled missions. So they saved just over $1 billion tax dollars by scrapping the missions. Except they didn't. They still had to reallocate the workers, decommission the facilities, dispose of equipment, and pay off contractual obligations. But the biggest loss was the value of all the lunar research we never conducted. After the end of it, canceling Apollo 18, 19, and 20 actually lost us billions. So why did we really stop going to the moon? Well, we might have those answers soon enough. In September of 2025, NASA plans to launch Artemis II, the first manned mission around the moon in more than 50 years. They won't be landing, but it's still a giant leap for mankind. Again. Then in 2026, Artemis III is planned to land astronauts near the south pole of the moon.
We are returning to the moon in a way we never have before, and the safety of our astronauts is NASA's top priority as we prepare for future Artemis missions. We've learned a lot since Artemis III, and the success of these early missions relies on our commercial and international partnerships to further our reach and understanding of humanity's place in our solar system. Artemis represents what we can accomplish as a nation and as a global coalition. When we set our sights on what is hard together, we can achieve what is great.
NASA is also working on a launch schedule for the first parts of their lunar space station, Gateway. Gateway is an international effort to put a manned space station into orbit around the moon. Gateway will spend a year orbiting the moon, slowly settling into polar orbit. Gateway will be ready by 2028, and Artemis 4 will be the first mission to the Gateway lunar space station. A space station in orbit around the moon would allow for longer missions, but it's just a stepping stone for what's next.
Artemis is a long-term exploration campaign to conduct science at the moon with astronauts and prepare for future human missions to Mars. That means we must get it right as we develop and fly our foundational systems so that we can safely carry out these missions.
What is the moon? Is it artificial? Where did it come from? Who built it? The first manned missions to the moon in over 50 years might finally give us the answers to all these questions. That is, if they actually tell us what they find. Okay, let's wrap this up. What can science explain about the hollow moon spaceship theory? Well, the formation of the moon is still unknown, so score theory 1, science 0. The density problem is said to be caused by the giant impact, which caused the Earth's upper mantle to form the moon. The mantle is much less dense than the core. Okay, but the problem with this is the giant impact theory probably isn't what happened. NASA also seems unable to decide whether the Earth and Moon are similar or different. On the one hand, they say the Moon is much more rich in precious metals than Earth. Then they say the composition is nearly identical, and both objects probably formed in the same place. So, which is it? NASA has a history of being confused, erasing videotapes, and losing important research, that kind of thing. So I take everything NASA says with a whole bucket of salt. And the theory about the Earth and the Moon forming out of that big donut shape, well, that wouldn't explain why the Moon is so much less dense than the Earth. We're told the Moon ringing like a bell is because the Moon is much less dense, and the Moon's rock has much less water, so vibrations reverberate longer and farther. Scientists say the Moon is porous, like a sponge, which explains its density. It's not hollow, it's just full of holes. That's pretty much the same thing, but fine. But in 2020, NASA announced that one of the instruments on a lunar satellite found something. It found evidence the Moon's subsurface might be even richer in precious metals than they previously thought. But the Moon's surface has virtually no metals in its chemical makeup. So it's porous and full of empty cavities, metallic on the inside but not metallic on the outside. To me, it sounds like NASA is describing a hollow metal ship. So I think the theory might get another point. Okay, the perfect eclipses. Here's where science wins. The eclipses aren't exact. They're close, but not perfect. Besides, the Moon is drifting farther away from the Earth every year, so eclipses are becoming less and less perfect all the time. Whether the Moon arrived 14,000 years ago or was formed billions of years ago, it was much closer to the Earth, so it was much larger in the sky. Now, NASA claims that seismic observations prove the Moon isn't hollow, and that's fair, but it's still conjecture. We don't know for sure what's at the center of the Earth, much less the center of the Moon. Now, the structures are said to be shadows or optical illusions, and the lights are from meteor impacts or reflections from glassy patches on the surface. Okay, that could be true. Some of those structures are 2 miles tall, but fine. The bottom line is this. Yes, the hollow moon spaceship theory is a wild one. I admit that, and many of the anomalies found on the moon can be explained. The explanations aren't perfect, but they're enough to satisfy skeptics. And I consider myself a skeptic, but I'm open-minded to any theory no matter how wild it might seem. I just want to know the truth. When I first learned about the hollow moon theory, I thought it was the craziest thing I'd ever heard. So when I started researching the story, I thought it would be a fun ride, a pure tinfoil hat experience that we could button up with science. But that is not what happened. The more I researched, the more I came to believe that, well, the moon is weird. There's just so much unknown and unexplainable that something doesn't feel right about what we've been told about the moon. But as always, the space agencies and the governments they serve are very selective about the images and information they release. So I have a message for them, a message for NASA. the European Space Agency, Russia, China, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, and anyone with the resources to put people back on the moon. I think the moon might be a hollow artificial structure. If you say I'm wrong, you're going to have to prove it. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. My name is AJ. This has been the Y-Files. If you had fun or learned anything, do me a favor, leave the podcast a nice review. That lets me know to keep making these things for you. And like most topics I cover on the Y-Files, today's was recommended by you. So if there's a story you'd like to learn more about, go to theyfiles.com/tips. And special thanks to our patrons who make the Y-Files possible. I dedicate every episode to you, and I couldn't do this without your support. So if you'd like to support the Y-Files, consider becoming a member on Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you get all kinds of perks. You get early access to videos without commercials. You get first dibs on products like the Hecklefish Talking Plushie. You get special access on Discord. And you get 2 private live streams every week just for you. Plus, you help keep the Y-Files alive. Another great way to support is grab something from the Y-Files store. Go to shop.theyfiles.com, and we've got mugs and t-shirts and all the typical merch, but I'll make you 2 promises. 1, our merch is way more fun than anyone else. And 2, I keep the prices much lower than other creators. And if you followed the Y-Files for a while, you know it's important to me to keep the cost to you as low as possible. All right, those are the plugs, and that's the show. Until next time, be safe, be kind, and know that you are appreciated.